Water, it's powerful and relentless, and if you're not heads up about that, it could definitely be devastating for a rescuer as well as the person you're trying to rescue.
Enchanted Sky Media.
From the Enchanted Sky Studios in Prescott, Arizona, this is Code 3, the Firefighters podcast, hosted by award-winning journalist Scott Orr. Code 3 features interviews with leading members of the fire service, discussing firefighting strategies, tactics, and other topics you need to know more about. Now, here's Scott.
That's right, and I will not let Parkinson stop me. Thank you for joining me again here on Code 3. You are listening to the show for and about firefighters. Let's get started. Swiftwater rescues are among the most dangerous rescues that you'll face. That may sound obvious, but some departments that haven't seen many Swiftwater incidents have been taken by surprise. Here out west, we have unique situations where dry riverbeds or washes accumulate trash and broken branches for months before they turn into raging rivers during the wet season. But no matter where you work, there are some principles of water rescue that simply should not be ignored or downplayed. Here to talk about them is Kevin Keith. Kevin is a captain and paramedic at Prescott Arizona Fire. He's been on the job for nearly 20 years. He's a Swiftwater rescue expert as well as a technical rescue technician. And Kevin Keith joins me now. Welcome to Code 3.
Hello, Scott.
So if you're not from Arizona, you might be wondering why I'm talking water rescue with a firefighter from the dry, dusty desert. Kevin, give us the reality of life in Arizona.
Well, like you said, Scott, it is dry and dusty the majority of the time with beautiful skies and great weather. However, we do have two seasons which produce quite a bit of precipitation in the winter time. It seems like we get winter storms that can be pretty catastrophic, and at our elevation, that includes snow most of the time, which will eventually melt and become water. But more importantly, our monsoon season creates flash flooding, which can be pretty impressive, especially in the dry waterways that we have throughout the town and our surrounding area.
What's the most common type of water rescue that you guys see?
Having someone drive into a wash that they think they can make it through. That it seems like people trapped in vehicles in waterways is the most common rescue that we perform.
So when it comes to a vehicle stuck in a flooded wash, would you prefer to use an aerial ladder or swim or wade out to it?
Of course, the ladder is our preference if we can reach it. You know, when we use an order of operations that, from low risk to high risk to try to make that determination. I mean, a lot of times when we arrive on scene, we'll speak with a person, and talking is actually the lowest risk. If we can coach a person out or into a position that's safe, that's ideal. But if we're talking about a vehicle stuck in a moving waterway, there's not much more to that one. Reaching, like you said, with a ladder is ideal. Throwing is the next thing, and that often requires throwing ropes or rope bags, and that's not really always a really good option for us, just because civilians and vehicles aren't usually equipped with flotation or a helmet or anything, and they're not dressed for the occasion. We'll wade out and bring the appropriate equipment to people if the water seems like it's at an appropriate height, nothing more, usually nothing much higher than our waist, and we'll accompany the person back to shore. A helicopter is an option. They have a hoist that they can use to pull people out of vehicles, and it seems to be a little bit safer than us swimming to a vehicle. And then rowing, taking a boat would be way down the line, one of our last resorts. But the swimming for a person, that's definitely the last option. That's putting two moving bodies in the waterway. And like you probably are aware, our waterways, get overgrown in the times when there's not water flowing through them strongly. And then there's often utility pipes and other obstacles like barbed wire fences that can be, a hazard for us.
So what you're saying then is that you would prefer not to put anybody else in the water at all if you possibly can avoid it?
Yes, sir. And I think that's a really good thing also for bystanders. I think oftentimes, people want to help their neighbor as quickly as possible. And that often means, trying to get out to them and help them out. But I would caution folks, especially if you don't have a EFD or a life jacket, that could be, catastrophic for you as well.
Now, you mentioned that throw bags are not always the best option. How effective have they been?
In the rescue community, or at least in our response model, we really think about the throw bags being mainly for the rescuers. So that would be like if you were swimming for the car and missed your mark or fell off, like the vehicle, and ended up floating downstream, the throw bag, it takes a little bit of an acquired skill to be able to use it effectively as the person receiving the line. And so, it's not, we'll throw it to people, but up until now, I've never had to throw one to a person yet. We've only thrown them to rescuers, and they are quite effective in those circumstances. But oftentimes, especially with tree-lined banks and other obstacles in the water, they have a limit to their effectiveness.
Now, your department has a boat. That is not, I would imagine, what you would consider a common tool for swiftwater rescue, but where have you used it and where has it been effective?
We qualify surface water. Swiftwater is a component of that when it's running through a channel. But on the lakes, we have an Achilles. It's a rubber boat with an aluminum hull on the bottom, but it's inflatable and it has a power motor on it. And we use that around the lake. We also have an inflatable raft that's used for Swiftwater specifically. And what's really great about that, Scott, is we can put that on a rope and use kind of rope systems in addition to having, paddlers in the boat. And that's kind of a hybrid rescue technique where we can, go to the victim, but also have the luxury of a tethered line. We haven't used one of those yet, but it's definitely in our bag of tricks.
Now, when would you pull that out of the bag? What circumstance fits it?
An example would be a vehicle in a crossing that's washed downstream off of the roadway. That would be a position where our ladder wouldn't be able to reach, or there's not sure footing for us as we enter the waterway. So we'll put a boat on a tether at that point, and we can lower it from a high point down the waterway and make access to the people in the vehicle. And then we'll be able to pull that boat sideways back to the bank after we load the patients.
So what are the most common mistakes that you see people make, especially in training for swiftwater rescue?
Good question. Well, one is just with regard to rope in the water. When we're training for swiftwater rescue, knowing how to deploy throw bags and knowing how to receive throw bags is really tricky. What we do is we try to affect our bodies at an angle to the current, which allows the current to do a lot of the work for us. And newer rescuers oftentimes are fighting the current. So they're trying to swim against it and they don't really have a concept of how to use it to their advantage. And so I'd say that's probably the first, or that's one of the issues. But another one would be walking into water blindly and facing the wrong direction. Entrapment hazards are very common. Rocks in the bottom of the waterway, downed logs, and other debris that we're unable to see, especially in murky floodwater. So walking blindly into the water without either probing with a staff or facing a right direction, or in most cases, we try not to walk if we can avoid it, if the water is deeper. And in those circumstances, we'll take a defensive swimming position. But yeah, I think, the rookie mistakes are just blindly walking into water without regard for the current, because water it's powerful and relentless. And if you're not heads up about that, it could definitely be devastating for a rescuer as well as the person you're trying to rescue.
How does water rescue at night differ? It's got to be harder, but what are the major factors?
I think, one thing in the fire service and, maybe all rescue services is accountability. And, part of it is also doing no further harm. So obviously, lack of visibility makes it hard to keep track of both resources as well as, the people that you're trying to rescue. When we try to deal with that issue is by putting glow sticks taped to helmets, put different colors. The rescuers maybe will have the green, and the patients or the victims or the subjects will have, an orange. And that way, if someone ends up in the water and they're floating down, we can try to keep eyes on them throughout. But mainly for us, and the few times that we've done night rescues in water, we just try to light up the scene as much as possible. And that's really where our helicopter can be invaluable if they're willing to show up. And, in our response area, we have a native air medical helicopter. Sometimes will lend a hand as long as it doesn't interfere with their ability to also provide life safety in other regards. But we call for DPS, or we have an option of using the Phoenix Fire Department and their Firebird to assist with that, aerial lighting. And that definitely makes a difference.
What is a typical response time to get to the scene and get set up for something like this?
In general, our response times are first unit on scene, and we really shoot for that targeted, 4 minutes or less. And that really depends on the location, obviously. The way that Prescott Fire is situated, well, two things I want to bring up. One is we work within a regional team concept. And so what's happened is members of Central Arizona Fire and Medical, Prescott Fire, the Williamson Valley Baghdad Fire and Medical District, and Yavapai County Search and Rescue, we've all built a consortium to where we have personnel that are interoperable. We train together, we talk shop together, and we plan our response together. So that definitely helps manage that response. But like you said, with regard to time, our first unit gets on scene. Those guys just throw on a PFD or a life jacket and a helmet. They grab throw bags, and then they position themselves accordingly. The captain usually on that first engine, or a technician who happens to also be on that engine that doesn't necessarily have to be a captain, will help coordinate a quick plan, call for the resources they think they need. Anytime that it's a known rescue with regard especially to Swiftwater, they will call out the station that I work at, which is the slated technical rescue station. But we'll also call for a ladder. So if the ladder is not in the first due, a ladder truck will show up as well. This provides enough personnel for upstream and downstream containment. We'll put spotters in place. We'll have people with throw bags, mainly like we talked about earlier, for the rescuer's benefit. Although if a competent or brave soul that ends up in the water can hold onto a rope, then good for them. We'll put the ladder in play if it can reach. If not, we'll call early for the helicopter as well. And we'll have members on the ground. Usually the support and Engine 74 will roll immediately. And our PPE, we're willing to go in with the clothing and that we have provided. It's a quick switch for us to get into that gear. And usually by the time the whole scene is set up and managed and the IC is on scene, we'll be able to make a pretty quick response. I'd say, if we could target of 10 minutes all personnel on scene, it's been a real success. And like things shift constantly, especially with in the water scenario, which is kind of an immediate rescue response. I mean, there's not a lot of messing around with that.
Well, with the vehicle in the water, do you send some crew members downstream to be prepared in case it moves, or does everybody concentrate on the vehicle?
Yes, sir. We'll send people downstream, and what we'll do is when we make a containment zone, there's several things we consider. And that is, we're looking for any obstacles in the water, anything that might pose a serious threat, like barbed wire fences, utility poles, other bridges or tunnels further downstream. And then we'll appropriately stage ourselves upstream of those hazards, but downstream from the victim if we can. That would be ideal, in a manner to allow us a buffer to be able to, operate within that range. And then there's a whole host of different techniques we can use. We can have a raft in the water downstream on a line. We can have what's called a Carlson board. It's like a big boogie board and a person tethered, holding on to one of those to go out. We could have a strong swimmer prepared on the bank, and throw baggers. The highest risk thing would be to put anyone swimming in the water in a flooded waterway. It's just not ideal around here, as with all the brush and we call those strainers, is what we refer to those, because they work like a sieve And it's very, very difficult to get out just as a rescuer alone. And if you're holding on to a person, a civilian, while you're trying to also manage that, it just becomes a very, very dire situation. We try to avoid all that.
What I'm hearing from you is that things are different with swiftwater rescue in this part of the country than other parts might be. Is that true from your experience?
Well, from what I've seen and heard and spoken with, everyone contends with a very regional specific hazards and challenges. I'm sure in the East Coast, even though they have waterways that flow frequently, when those get flooded, just the industrial component and the population density could probably make those really a challenge, I would assume. But yes, the West, and especially in the desert West, we contend with a lot of hazards. And I want to add, because I think maybe departments that frequently deal with water moving in their response area kind of have a real a knack for how to work within that. And because we have flood events that are very inconsistent, you may have one or two big rescues in your career and then go, a decade where either you're not on shift or you're not part of that team. And so because of that, it's imperative that we schedule training, frequently in order to be able to address that skill level and maintain our ability to navigate in rushing water. And we try to mimic that when water is high on the Birdie or on the Salt River. We try to go down to those rivers and do our training to mimic the rescue profile, which is heavily treed banks, rocky waterways, and unfortunately with a myriad of hazards such as floating tree debris and strainers.
All right, good information, Kevin Keith. Thanks for being with me on Code 3 today.
Hey, thank you so much, Scott.
And we put some more information about swiftwater rescue techniques on our website at code3podcast.com/wet. Check it out. All right, that's it. That's all for this edition of Code 3. This time we talked about tactics and safety in swiftwater rescue. I'd like to hear about your experiences and what you've learned from them. Just email me, scott@code3podcast.com, or leave a voicemail at 562-337-9902. I will read your comments and play your messages on a future show. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next time with more, and I hope you'll join me. I'm Scott Orr, and until then, stay safe.
Code 3 is a production of Enchanted Sky Media. To contact us, get more information on today's topic, or subscribe to the podcast, go to code3podcast.com.